Guys who married Bridezillas, what happened after the wedding? According to my meal, I'm the Bridezilla. We had a maximum limit of 36 people including ourselves and my son. My mill gave me a guest list which included, you guessed it, 36 names. She assured me that not everyone would come, but that they would be very $appreciative of the invite. I felt gross by that and left the decision up to my husband, since it was his family. Needless to say, they all got invites. I had asked for RSVPs to be given a few months before the wedding. Since the meal had used up all of the guest list, I had greatly reduced my side of the guest list to 4 people, with some on hold, until I knew the exact numbers. I finally lost it 2 weeks before the wedding, when I still didn't have RSVPs. She said she would work on it and get back to me. A week before the wedding, she said one family also needs to bring 9 other people because they were going on a family trip and our town was on the way, so they would all be here anyway. I flat out said no and called her out on the BS. I cut off the guest list, said that I was inviting the rest of my guest list and that whoever hadn't RSVP'd didn't get a chair or plate. Right up to the day of the wedding they were making changes. We got married at a Chinese buffet so that it would be the simplest planning and everyone would have something that they like to eat. My dress was $40 off Amazon. My flowers were $20 from Costco. We had a Dairy Queen ice cream cake for the wedding cake point, yet she still makes it out that I was the Bridezilla. My coworker married a crazy Bridezilla. I'll try to just hit the bullet points of what happened leading up to, during, and after the wedding, but it's still a lot. Point: the moment he proposed she lost her sex drive. According to him, she also basically stopped acting like the woman he fell in love with and started acting like her real self, which was batshit crazy. Point: a week after he proposed she quit her job because her full-time job was now planning the wedding. The wedding was horrible. I'm getting there. She had a fight with his mother because the bride demanded the groom's mom pay for half the wedding, but get zero input and wasn't allowed to contribute to the guest list, which was 95% the bride's friends and family. Point: Brid, who was 30 years old, subsequently egged her future Mill's house. Point: when bride and groom had a spat about the egging, he went to the work the next day and she shaved her head and sent him video of her screaming and sobbing as she buzzed her hair off in the bathroom. I worked with him. He showed me the video when he said he had to leave, and I strongly urged him to have her assessed by a psychiatrist. He made a dumb joke about sexy with a crazy girl is the best kind and I pitied him. Point: wedding was in a pool clubhouse in summer. It was much too small for the 150 plus people they invited. Someone forgot to turn the air on until after the place was packed. A lifeguard showed up in a swimsuit to turn it on, but it did little given it was already sweltering. 2 rows of chairs in the clubhouse were ribboned off with reserved signs on them, so no one sat in them. They were later occupied by the 6-seated bridesmaids, leaving about a dozen chairs open once the wedding started. The one groomsman stood by the groom and didn't sit. Elderly people were left standing or reduced to sitting on the floor as there was no way to get to the chairs once the ceremony started. Bride showed up 90 minutes late, having been unhappy with her hair, wig, and makeup, so she took it all off and did it herself. So all the guests are standing for the 1.5 hours waiting for her. Groom was literally standing at the altar sweating his ass off in a wool suit in the South's high summer and was clearly not sure if she would show up. He looked like he felt sick. Point: when bride showed up she burst into the clubhouse, marched down the aisle, and snapped at the officiant to hurry up and get started. During the prayer, while the religious groom had his head bowed, she turned to wave at everyone. I don't pray, so I was looking up. Then she told her mother to go get her some water. She drank a bottle of water during the prayer and kept grinning and waving at people in attendance, paying zero mind to her groom in front of her. When the ceremony was over, tables were crammed into the clubhouse and apparently only family and immediate friends of the bride had seats at tables. The rest of us were going to be standing outside during the reception, so I didn't see a dance, a speech, the cake cut, nothing. Point: the food was served outside in the southern US July heat with bugs everywhere. The bride made the groom go get her food over and over. He meekly stood in line with the other 150 people until people insisted he go sit and let them get food. Nope, she told him to get food, so he said he had to be the one to get her food. Point: she never left her table, never greeted any of her guests. Apparently they had a massive fight as they were leaving the following day for the honeymoon. Bride laying all the failures of the wedding she planned at him and his mom's feet. She threw his luggage out of the car and tried to drive to the airport by herself, but he had their tickets and jumped on the hood to stop her from driving off in his car. He got fired about a month after the wedding because he kept showing up late, leaving early, and leaving in the middle of day, usually because she called him with some crisis. 1 year after the wedding I got a thank you note for my wedding gift, which was signed by just the bride with a note that said, "As you may have heard, Ryan and I have had bumpy start in our first year as a married couple, and we are separated now. Thanks for the lovely gift." The divorced a couple months later. I was a Bridezilla. It was a small wedding, like 50 people, was going to be at a park, very casual. Everything was handmade, or from the dollar store. I only ended up with a dress from a David's, because my first little boho dress I ordered was more of a shirt, so my mom and friends took me dress shopping. My mom told the lady not to tell me any prices, but I told her under $200. I tried on one dress, and cried because I loved it so much. My mom bought it, and I later looked it up, and saw it was $3,000. So that changed everything. No more wedding at a park. So we booked a small venue. We served pizza and pies still, and the groomsmen were still wearing polos and shorts. Bridesmaids were still in some Rue 21 dresses I bought for them. I only became a Bridezilla the day if none of my family I had invited showed up, so my husband's side was full and mine was empty. Even our friends sat on his side. Our MC read the speech I wrote before we were even at the altar. Our camera died, so we didn't get the recording. I tripped going up to the altar. I had herniated a disc a week before the wedding, so I was miserable and in so much pain. I cried so hard afterwards. It felt like it was terrible, like everything was ruined. I did my best to hold it together, but I was so relieved when it was over. If I could do it all over, I would change everything, especially how I acted. None of that excuses my snippy behavior or my crying. Just because I was stressed and upset and hurting doesn't give me the right to make others feel bad. Edit. I really appreciate the reassurance, but I definitely wasn't nice to the people trying to help, and I'll always regret the way I acted. I think I was reverse Bridezilla. I've been married twice. First time around, had a medium-sized stressful church wedding. Parents probably spent $20k on the whole shindig about 20 years ago. Marriage lasted less than 5 years. Next time I got engaged, I was like, yeah, been there, done that on the whole big wedding thing. Kinda think it's a scam. Not interested in planning or paying for one of those ever again. My parents had already been tapped enough, and I still felt bad that they'd had to shell out for a wedding when the marriage was over so quickly. I said we should go to the JP and maybe have a nice dinner at a restaurant. However, my husband was a little younger, had never been married, and his huge family was all excited over the idea of a big white wedding for their only boy. So he dug in his heels and said that he really wanted a wedding, and could we please come to a compromise. My compromise, which I did not expect him to take me up on, was that if he really wanted a wedding, he could plan and pay for it himself. He excitedly agreed. Well, folks, I'm here to tell you that he was as good as his word. I was 100% checked out of the entire wedding planning. Zero stress level. I was a few months pregnant and working, so this was very agreeable to me. I literally showed up when he told me. I did go buy a wedding dress from David's Bridal. Pointed to the first reasonably priced, reasonably attractive gown I saw, tried it on, and was out the door with it in 15 minutes. Wedding day comes, and my husband to be has gone all out. His whole family had pitched in, and they had produced a band, a sit-down dinner, flowers, a cake, horse and carriage, photographer, everything. Considerably more fun than my first wedding, and less money spent overall. Never had so much fun in my whole life. Everything was a surprise, because I legitimately had no idea what he'd arranged. My parents were so thrilled that they didn't have to pay for a big wedding again, that they sent us on a pretty nice honeymoon instead. So I guess I married Groomzilla. But it was pretty awesome all around, no complaints. Our friend, he and my husband met when kids, so think about almost 20 years of friendship, married a Bridezilla. She is evangelical and religion is pretty much her life. And he was agnostic, nice metalhead geek guy. They asked us to be one of the best man woman. Me and my husband, we are both tattooed, and when we arrived at the wedding we were his only friends. Everyone in that big wedding was from her, now also his, church. Well, the preacher kept saying to him he had his old life and now his new life, his old friends and now the new friends. Yada yada. But all the time criticizing his old ways, the authentic way, and everyone kept looking at me and my hubby like we were beasts. Worst day ever. She is that kinda of person that wants to be an influencer. Every damn thing is in her Instagram. Their relationship seems perfect there, but he always seems so unhappy, so apathetic, especially when we used to see him before the pandemic. Always talking about how they are so different, how things are, like she wants a stories are basically she's saying he does nothing right. It's even humiliating. She made him stop talking to us. This last week, he got out of every group we had. He stopped answering my husband, who is very sad he lost his friends. I believe she is the one replying the few weird messages he gets. That's the Bridezilla. It seems to be really usual for the Bridezilla to act up on social media, but in the real life is all messy. I was called the Bridezilla after getting back with my ex-boyfriend I broke up with from high school. His parents got into his head that he should propose. His parents got married at the age of 19, and they thought that, since we are 19 we should follow in their footsteps. We were only back together for over 1 month at that point. Nothing against anyone that married young or married suddenly. He proposed. I was excited because this is supposed to be an important moment in my life and I can plan the beautiful wedding I always dreamed of. I immediately started to look at venues since we had 10 months to plan. His mom complained to everyone behind my back that I was planning too soon. His family are strict Catholics, so when I said I didn't want to have mass for our wedding, they made sure the priest talked to me to convince me to change my mind. When I planned to go wedding dress shopping, she complained again about how I was doing it too soon, 8 months out from the wedding, and then she brought some of her kids without asking me. On top of that, I invited a mutual friend of ours, and I got a text from that friend on my way to the bridal shop asking if she could bring her kids, because my fiance's mom told her to. His mom also got mad at me for not including all 7 of her daughters in the wedding party. Whenever I tried to plan wedding stuff with my fiancé he couldn't handle it because planning the proposal took too much energy out of him. That lasted a few months. Whenever his family tried controlling the wedding, I got bothered because they were planning around themselves. They said that this isn't about me and my fiancé, it's about their family. Because their family is a big deal and this wedding was about them. Overall, they called me Bridezilla to my face multiple times because I didn't like how they were controlling my wedding. Within those few months I remembered why I broke up with my fiancé the first time. So I broke up with him again. F that. My sister was a Bridezilla. She asked me to be her bridesmaid. The dresses were hundreds of dollars and my mom ended up paying for it because she knew I couldn't afford it. $70 in alterations later the stupid dress finally fit. I lived in Edmonton at the time and my sister was in Abbotsford because, by Vancouver, she demanded I fly down for her bachelorette party. Fine $300 for a flight there, and my boyfriend drove out for the wedding and picked me up. $200 gas there, $200 back. The party was a week before the wedding, so when I flew down I just stayed until the wedding. Stayed with my mom until my sister kicked me out on the night before her wedding. Wanted a special night with her 2 maids of honor. I was the only just bridesmaid and therefore couldn't be there. During the bachelorette party I was told I needed to bring booze for myself and the bride. Fine. Went to the liquor store and she ran up $100 on my card with what she wanted. Whatever, it's her wedding. Proceeds to drink none of it. Went to bed at the hotel early because she was pissy for some reason. Then gave my alcohol, all $100 of it, to her husband for his bachelor party the next night. Okay, fine. Then she gets pissy my gift for them wasn't off her registry. I looked at the registry and there was nothing and a $200 beach even put a $900 vacuum on there. Then has the balls to get angry that I was a bridesmaid and didn't spend enough on her. All said and done, her stupid wedding cost me over $1,000, and like I said my mom paid the $300 for my dress. She then didn't speak to me for years after, and only to tell me that she didn't want me as a bridesmaid and I ruined her wedding. That she only asked me out of courtesy and that the spot was actually meant for her wedding planner, our cousin Beach. Dunno if she's happily married or not. We don't keep in touch. Her wedding ruined our relationship. Not a guy. Didn't marry a Bridezilla. Did, however, spend 4 years of my life working in a men's formal wear sales and rental chain in the Seattle suburbs in the 90s. Specifically in downtown Kirkland, where the average wedding gown from the bridal shop down the street started at $3K. My most memorable Bridezilla was this woman who came in with her fiancé. Poor dude never said a word. She wanted a very specific color of shirt to match her diamond white gown, in a mandarin collar, with a mid-range shawl collar 2-button jacket. 14 of them. Okay, pretty straightforward. But, when you're renting shirts, particularly these shirts, because they were newer, so some were closer to white and some were very ivory, and they're coming from a warehouse downtown, I can't guarantee that every shirt will even be the same color, let alone that exact shade of diamond white. Which I explained twice, and she signed off on because this was not my first Bridezilla rodeo. She agreed, but emphasized the shirts would all be the same color, and they would be the right color. Okay, lady. I'll do my best. Q 6 weeks later, the Thursday before the wedding, Bridezilla comes in with her poor fiancé. We pull out the tuxes. Of course the shirts are exactly as I warned her they would be, several shades, and only one was her perfect color, not the groom's. She lost her ever-loving S&T, screaming, crying, pounding on our glass countertop, wailing at the top of her lungs that we were discriminating against her because she was Japanese. Yeah, hon. So is like half of Greater Seattle. She got so agitated she shattered our front counter with her pounding. The cops were called. Bride got arrested. Groom took his and everyone else's tuxes and left. Still without a word other than profuse apologies. Sunday, I happened to be accepting returns. Fogg comes back with 14 unworn tuxes. He explains that bride spent 24 hours in jail after my spineless manager refused to press charges. At the rehearsal dinner, bride threw some insane temper tantrum, complete with throwing glassware, swearing, and finally punching the groom in the face. He declined to proceed with the marriage. I will never forget that woman's crazy eyes, or her insistence on the perfect colored shirts from a $90 rental. I'm not sure if this counts as a Bridezilla, because I'm not sure if she needed the actual wedding a certain way, but my best friend growing up, he's married to a piece of work. He's still married to her, for the kid's sake, 15 years later, but so far she has threatened attempts of suicide. When he talked about divorcing, she also has this mystery illness, where the doctors are out of ideas what it could be, and leaves her in a wheelchair. Everyone at this point is leaning towards Munchausen syndrome. They set up a GoFundMe because she was on her deathbed 5 years ago and needed a chartered flight to go see her birthland of Ireland. They were going for some astronomical amount of like $50,000, but because she's a raging beach they achieved like maybe $2,000. She then was pissed about that, which I'm not gonna lie. A part of me thought that shit was hilarious. She has also withheld her children from seeing my friend's parents for stupid reasons, and that blows, because his parents are the kindest people ever. And many more things I'm forgetting at the moment. The worst part? It has turned my buddy into a raging asshole. We are no longer friends, and he has treated everyone close to him like shit, including his loving, awesome family. My theory on that is, because since she allows him to not hang out with anyone, he's only around her, and his perception of how you treat people is skewed by her faked up ways. Anyways, I could go on for hours about her. I mean, I don't know if this counts, but my first and only for as long as I live marriage was to a manipulative narcissist. She got a hold of me in college when my parents didn't deliver on their promised financial support. Now that would have been fine. I could have made plans and changed how I did my schooling or something, but no. They promised X amount of money a month and then gave one half. I had rent to pay, and so I basically stopped eating. I had no furniture in my apartment. I slept on egg crate foam. She sees this and starts feeding me, and we start sleeping together in her nice warm bed. Then I moved in with her because things were going well, and that's when shit hit the fan. I owed her now, and I could not get away. She convinced me that she needed me, and that I had to be there to support her in her every endeavor. Every single one. I went to her classes with her, I went clothes shopping with her, and I didn't go out with my friends because I need you to sleep. She made me feel so obligated to her that my life almost fell apart. I felt so indebted to her I let her treat me like garbage. She emotionally blackmailed me into getting married. If you actually loved me, you'd marry me. She knew I was a sensitive person who genuinely cared about other people, and she used that to say if I didn't marry her I was an evil person who didn't care. The marriage lasted 2 years. She kept us financially off balance by moving us around a bunch. Finally I get a good job and had my own car and started building a new life, and she tried her BS in full force. I had been going to therapy and she dropped out of couples counseling because I don't like that therapist. I finally left her and we eventually got divorced. The most faked up thing was, after we were separated all she wanted was to get me back in the sack. I noped the fuck out. That would be all I needed to get my estranged wife pregnant. She never knew I was sterile. Heck, I didn't know at that time. All she wanted was a baby, and she probably would have left me had she known. She got a boyfriend and, get this, moved with him out of state. One day she called me up and says, I want to thank you for breaking up with me in person, like an adult. My current partner just took this box and disappeared. She eventually found someone to give her a baby. I saw him, but never saw him smile. She's a monster, and I regret ever meeting her. I had a Bridezilla. Does that count? She had insisted that she was a traditionalist, and as I was marrying her daughter she would be paying for the whole deal. That was fine with my wife, so it was fine with me. She took no significant further role in the planning process, which my wife did all of, other than paying the bills as they rose. Very late in the game, like a month before, after 18 months of planning, my wife sent her the seating plan, just to make sure it would be workable. She calls, and after what sounds like a robust discussion, my wife comes to me and tells me that her mother isn't happy with the seating plan and demands that she will sit at the bridal table or she's pulling her money, which would have resulted in us wearing significant cancellation fees, etc. I ask for the phone and ask my mill to explain the problem to me. She gets very emotive, starts ranting about how it's the tradition she wanted to follow, which no one knew about, and I haven't seen at any family weddings since, and that she was going to withdraw her money if she didn't have her way. I took a second to consider my options and told her that it was fine. Fortunately, a seat at the bridal table had just opened up and that she could have it. It was mine. I wouldn't be needing it. I then hung up the phone and handed it back to my wife and told her she'd call back. She did and sat where she was told. She had another outburst on the morning of the wedding that I wasn't privy to. Something about going into a massive screaming fit about not having enough helium to inflate the balloons. She ordered the helium and blamed my bill for having used the helium for recreational purposes the night before, which I've had explained to me didn't happen. Apparently that was a cracker. The story gets retold often amongst her children at family gatherings, amongst tales of her rather ridiculous escapades. TLDR at the end. My ex-best friend was a Bridezilla. She was always quite short with people and had a short fuse, but I put up with that side because we used to have a good laugh. I met someone who I was with for 3 years when we got engaged, then another 3 years before we got married, and we'd been friends for 4 years before we got together. But before we got married she used to stay over at our house all the time. We all got along. Then she met a guy. Actually my hubby helped her as she liked him, and hubby worked with him. After being together about 4 months they got engaged. She started changing from then. Would talk to people really posh, as though she was above everyone. Went out and bought a horse to appear like she had money, when I knew full well she didn't. Lots of little things. She'd talk down to me. She asked me to be a bridesmaid at her wedding, so I said yes of course. Really wish I hadn't now, but then a couple of months later we met for coffee, and I told her I was pregnant. I thought she'd be as happy as I was, as we'd been trying for a while. Nope. According to her I got pregnant just to ruin her wedding and take the focus off her. Okay. Once we got pregnant we planned to finally tie the knot before the baby arrived, and chose to do this on our anniversary. It would be really small close friends and family wedding. This was only 3 weeks after her wedding. Not perfect, but we wanted it on our special day. Well, when her wedding day arrived she had it in a church. She's not religious at all, and he was a very vocal atheist that had an expensive wedding dress, hired out the most expensive hotel in our local city. It was a huge do, which I know weddings are, and that's fine. It was her special day. I was there for her, helped her, did everything a bridesmaid was meant to do. Even if I did have morning sickness, I kept a smile on my face holding her ridiculously long veil up most of the day. Our wedding day arrived. Very small registry office affair, which was perfect for us. She sat there looking like she was chewing a lemon. Didn't smile once. Then outside she spoke with my mum, who'd she known for years. My mum said, "You'll be used to all this by now," something like that. She replied yes, but mine was a lot grander. She came to the reception at our friend's hotel. There was about 30 people maximum for the reception. She accused my other best friend from childhood of playing footsie with her new husband under the table. My friend was not like that at all. She'd caught his foot while crossing her legs. Then when I eventually had my baby was the final straw. She visited for the first time in about 6 months. Said, "Oh, it's got red hair," didn't even refer to her by her name at all. That was all she had to say, so I cut her off. Best thing I ever did. I hadn't noticed how toxic she was and how on pins I was around her all the time. Now me and hubby live in the same little house we did before we got married. Did not have any debt at all from the wedding and are still very happy 6 years after our wedding. She got into loads of debt from her wedding. Her husband lost his job for gross misconduct. She blamed my husband because he got promoted. Hers crashed a company car. He was to blame. Tried to cover it up until the person he hit sued him via the company. Had to sell her horse, and now 6 years later, last I heard, they're living in her dad's basement. TLDR. Ex-best friend Bridezilla got in so much debt they have lived 6 years of marriage in her dad's basement. I think I was a Bridezilla, but in the opposite way. I didn't want something grand or expensive. I wanted everything small. I didn't want any help, and I wanted to make all the choices and just get my husband's approval for final decisions. I wanted to get married at one of the 2 local courthouses. They're both beautiful and historic, except the one got struck by lightning, so it was taken out of the options, and then run off for a long honeymoon. No reception, no guests, nothing extreme. When I finally accepted this wasn't happening, my husband is the only male in a close-knit Italian family, I put my foot down fast and hard. I'm sure I came off as a complete asshole / Bridezilla a decent amount of the time, but I knew if I didn't set limits or guidelines we would have a 200-person wedding, and I would only know 10 of them at a church. We are not religious, and with all kinds of traditions, not my thing or his. We ended up with a 25-person guest list at a very nice venue, drove our Honda from the ceremony to the reception, and I negotiated the price on everything. What would have easily been a $25,000 wedding we did for just under $10,000, paid in sections over the 2-year engagement. It was still way more than I wanted to spend, and I still wish we had eloped, when I'm being completely honest with myself. But my husband loved it, and I always joke with him that he got to have his special day, as I know that means a lot to him. He's a great man and he deserved the effort we put in. And in the end the wedding was gorgeous, and it set a good tone for my in-laws on how I address situations, which is priceless. First marriage was to a Bridezilla. Got drunk before the ceremony, wouldn't dance because she was too anxious, people would make fun of her. Tried bragging to my cousins during the dinner that our wedding was better than theirs. 4 of us got married in a 2-year span. Invited her ex-boyfriend to the ceremony that I later found out she had been sleeping with both before and after our wedding. Took the money we had received as gifts and were planning on using for a house down payment and spent it on random crap. Had a ton of debt she kept from me. Left her a year after to the day and never looked back. Now happily married to a great woman. Obviously hindsight yada yada, but there were a lot of red flags. I should have noticed big things after the wedding. Spent money more quickly than she could make it. I ended up having to take on a second job. Already worked 50+ a week just to cover bills. She got into drugs and stopped going to work. Would go visit her friends in the evenings. Found out later on she was going to her boyfriend's. Final straw was when I found out what she was doing with the money. I didn't know at first she was into drugs. Online payments of bills weren't as popular when we were married, so I would give her the money to go pay some during banking hours. One day got pulled over and charged with no insurance on my vehicle. Turns out she was taking the money for bills and buying drugs. When the notices for no payment would come in the mail, she would hide them or rip them up. Handed her separation papers on our 1-year anniversary. Late to the party and using an alt because reasons, but here goes. My best friend married a Bridezilla. They had been dating about 6 months and she integrated well with us as friends. She'd been an acquaintance with some of us for a while. More on that later. We thought we'd all be just great friends forever. One Monday afternoon I get a text from her. Getting married Wednesday, need you in Cancun as soon as possible. Well, I don't have a super important job, but I can't just get up in the midst of the project and fly to faking Mexico in the middle of the week, and I explained that to her. Had I some kind of notice, I might have been able to get off and fly down. I didn't even know they had gone to Cancun. The next 24 hours I got the nastiest texts from her. Like, you say he's your best friend, but you won't even come down for the most important day in his life. And later she'd like, if you don't get your ass down here, he's not going to speak to you again. So I texted him, and he explained that they had flown down on a whim. She made good money, and it was her idea to get married while they were down there. He was only aware that she had asked me if I could fly down, and he didn't actually expect me to be there, and totally understood that there was no way in hell I could get down there and not seriously fuck up my job. Well, it also turns out she had been bullying all his friends into coming down. There were so many texts, she could not have been doing much else for 2 days. So they get back, and the first thing he does is call to tell me all about it. Meanwhile she's in the background saying she'd like make sure to tell him he totally ruined our wedding, and I don't know why you think you need to be talking to him. Total 180 from nice, fun lady to evil two-faced cunt. And then she began cutting off not just me, but all our friends. None of us heard from him for nearly 2 months, and I finally called, and he just said he couldn't talk now. And that was it. So, about 5 months after they got married, he showed up at my house about dinner time and telling me how miserable he was and how controlling and just nasty she was, and lying to her friends about how he was worthless fuck up that she's rescued and trying to reform. She threw out most of his clothes because they were ruined and made him buy all new stuff. And little accidents happened to most of his toys. A dent and crack appeared in the top of the PlayStation, and it stopped working. His little MP3 player I got him for his birthday got dropped in water. Laptop hard drive was suddenly crashed. Sheet like that point we had a long talk. He cried. I cried. We hugged and fell asleep for a little while on the couch. I missed him so much. Anyway, he left really late, and they apparently had a huge fight that night, and the next day he came home from work and half his sheet was already piled up in the pickup. He ended up bringing all his stuff to my house. Oh yay, but he lived with me for 3 or 4 months, so that was fun. Anyway, the reason for the fight was that she was angry because he came to see me specifically. He didn't go to any of his other friends she had cut off, but he came to me. And that pissed her off. She was screaming, wanting to know what his obsession with me was, and wanted to know if we had faked, and did he enjoy getting it up the ass. I'm a gay male, by the way. He's straight, obviously. And she's a crazy faking cunt. Oddly, it was a clean divorce. Acrimonious, but clean. Her job involves regular repeat business. He met her because a lot of our friends and friends of friends were clients. So her business started dropping off hard when everyone began to find out what a manipulative thundercunt she was. I feel my older brother dodged a bullet with his ex. Fuck you Cindy. They dated for 3 years and my brother wanted to pop the question because she's his forever. Yuck. A week before their trip to San Antonio, he wanted to propose where they first started dating. A friend of hers came to my brother, told him the truth. That Cindy was cheating on him with another guy who knew my brother was her main boyfriend. Cindy's brother confirmed it after finding out a few days before their trip. He took a friend on the trip, and they spent it swimming at the hotel and walking around the city. Said friend was already married and wanted to make sure my brother didn't do anything dumb on the trip. Brother was hurt, but also relieved, because was she really the one he wanted to end up with? She was a party girl and he hardly drank. She had to have name brand everything. My brother wouldn't care if you got him a dress shirt from the thrift store, as long as it was still in decent shape. 2 years later he met my sister-in-law, and 4 years of marriage they finally had my nephew. Signed D. Last I heard, her brother and my younger brother are Facebook friends. She was on her second divorce and in debt. Her second ex and her parents have custody of their daughter because she's irresponsible. A cousin of mine, whom I love dearly, she really is a great and normal person otherwise, ended up being a total Bridezilla. I have spent a large portion of my life as a professional photographer and studio owner, so I'm very familiar with the wedding and event industry and costs. So I think it's fair to say that my cousin, and I actually mean her parents, spent around $45k easily on her wedding. She had some of the craziest extravagances, favors, and food, and the church and the venue were at the most expensive places in our city. She wore 3 different dresses/gowns over the course of the night. There were artists hired to draw stuff and people around the venue. She had multiple photographers. It was very over the top and the most expensive wedding I've ever attended. I was a bridesmaid, and I had to spend nearly $2k just to be in her wedding. Yeah, I know, I shouldered backed out. Not to mention I was living out of the state at the time and had to spend extra money to travel back and forth for all her pre-wedding events and parties. Prior to getting married, her and her husband had been together a few years. After they got married they were divorced shortly. After about a year I maintain the theory that the bigger the wedding, the shorter the marriage. Meanwhile, my husband and I, who had never lived together prior to getting married, just loved the heck out of each other and dated for a couple years, eloped and got married for around $1k, and that included the cost of our rings for each other, wedding attire, and plane tickets and lodging, and we have been married for nearly 12 years now. We had a large wedding, but my wife is an event planner, so she had it totally wired. Her parents had put aside money years ago for her wedding, and we made the most of it. The only Bridezilla was her sister, who managed to create 100 times more unnecessary drama planning the bridal shower than my wife did for the wedding itself. Months later I told her about her sister and we both got a good laugh out of it. Our whole focus was on our guests having fun. No expensive custom dresses for the bridesmaids, only a uniform color, black. I hate goofy wedding outfits. I wanted all my groomsmen to look like James Bond, so we all had sharp black tuxes, classy and cheap to rent. We managed to have an incredible wedding at an exclusive yacht club, for free except for food, since my buddy was a member, and it was in the fall, after they officially closed. My wife had a beautiful $5,000 designer dress she had gotten for $300 at a consignment store. We made our own invites on our printer, lot of work, but they came out great. We were in our late 30s, so it was a mix of family and lots of friends. We had budgeted a free cocktail hour and then beer and wine, but a friend, without telling us, paid for open bar for the entire event. All of this with no Bridezilla. In fact, my wife asked me at one point, while we were planning it, if she was being a Bridezilla, and I assured her she was not. Many years later people still talk about it as one of the best weddings they'd ever attended. I was lucky. All I had to do was whatever my wife told me to do and show up. I hate the whole Bridezilla thing, because this should be the bride's day. My wife had a pro planner executing everything the day of the wedding, so she didn't have to worry about it. I can't imagine it bodes well for the marriage if the bride is a monster on her wedding day. I think I need to mention something that I haven't seen yet in the feed. Groomzillas. I was with my ex-fiancé for 3 years before getting ready to tie the knot. It started with the ring. I had explained that I wanted something small and simple because I don't like flashy jewelry, and he bought literally the exact opposite, huge and actually really gaudy. Some big rings can certainly be pretty, but this reminded me of something an Italian grandma would be wearing. Then came the wedding planning. All I wanted was a cooler of cold beers for our friends, some BBQ, and maybe a campfire at the end of the day. To wind down instead he ends up planning a 500+ person event with past hors d'oeuvres, cocktail hour, private suites for me and him to get ready in, private balcony for us to do first look and take photos, all at this extremely hobbity-tobbity old hotel. Point next. The dress. He actually marked magazines of what he thought I should buy. Point last and finally not least the kicker. I was expected to pay for all of this by myself. I'm very good at saving and he figured that it wouldn't be a big deal until I found out how much this was going to cost me. 75,000 plus bucks. I told that idiot to kick rocks. Big time. I know this probably won't get seen. The Bridezilla I know and her husband are still together 7 years later, and I'm honestly shocked. She is my best friend's sister. She has very rich taste, and he makes good money, but not to match her taste. Here is the list of things that happened. Point he proposed to her with a ring he bought, but when she found out that it was only $5,000 she made him exchange that with her to pick out the $10,000 ring she wanted. He proposed to her on Valentine's Day at a really nice restaurant and she declined, saying that he needed to re-propose to her in Paris as that is where she always imagined her being proposed to. Point he got them a trip to Paris that was actually a whole European tour. He planned to re-propose to her in Paris in front of the Eiffel Tower, except the ring was in his luggage and was sent to Ireland, which was where they were going to next. So when he got the ring again in Ireland, he proposed to her in front of a castle, and she said yes. She said yes only under the condition that they could have staged pictures of him proposing, which they did, and said they had to go back to Paris so that they could have staged proposal pictures in front of the Eiffel Tower, which they did. Point she took a trip to England to get a custom-made dress. She bought a $10,000 dress and then shipped it to America. Point she insisted that they have an engagement party at an exclusive rooftop club, which they did. He put his foot down about money, so she had all of her bridesmaids hand make all wedding invitations, decorations, flowers, and all items. I was not a bridesmaid, but was always there and helping because of my friend. Point he was not allowed to go to any type of crazy bachelor party except for dinner with friends, but she had her bachelorette party in Vegas, and we all stayed in the Venetian. We went to a bunch of clubs and strip clubs, and she was dancing and grabbing other guys' dicks. It was pretty fun, because we were young and crazy, but she was a crazy mess the whole time. She peed on her leg and she cried, while eating tacos, that she didn't want to get married. Point after the bachelorette she decided she did want to get married, but she was happy to get that out of her system. Point the wedding was held at a place that looked like a legit castle. It was beautiful, but had to be expensive. To save money, she made the bridesmaids and groomsmen basically be the waitstaff for all the guests. She was late walking down the aisle and was saying hi to all the guests while walking, including a personal hello to her ex-boyfriend from high school. Point her sister had to be her personal makeup artist and make sure to bustle her dress and check her hair and makeup every 30 minutes. We were all honestly so relieved when it was over. Surprisingly, she calmed down and became almost normal after the wedding. They have a kid now and just celebrated 7 years. They are still paying off the wedding though. My ex-sister-in-law was an absolute Bridezilla. Point I grew up in the UK and come from a fairly big family. I have 6 older siblings. They'd been engaged for almost 6 months of a 24-month engagement when I left the country to go traveling through Australia, and as a result I wasn't present for most of her batshit craziness. They set the date and sent out invites. I explained to my brother that I wouldn't be coming home for it. Among other reasons, one of my other siblings was also getting married about 2 months later. Neither had set a date when I left. I'd been saving for a long time to go traveling, and I couldn't afford to attend both, and didn't want to attend one and not the other. Both my siblings were very accepting of my decision. One day I get FB message from Bridezilla asking when I'd be landing back in the UK for the wedding. I told her that I'd already spoken to my brother and thank you for the invite, but I wouldn't be attending. In response I received a message calling me almost every name under the sun and telling me that if I didn't attend it would break my brother's heart and I'd never be welcome in their home. I reached out to my brother and he apologized for her, but put it down to the stress of the wedding. Point they'd divorced before I made it home after my brother realized he was washing another man's underwear. I was only traveling for about 2 years. My dad was married many times, and he was very secretive about it. I didn't know about his previous kids until I was an adult. One of his wives was a Bridezilla. She had it in her mind that my toddler son and her toddler granddaughter would walk down the aisle hand in hand. They didn't even know each other or met before the wedding, and no rehearsal. I was in the back room that she would walk out from, and she's trying to force the hand holding. Everyone's seated and ready for the ceremony. I put a stop to it. Then her poor granddaughter doesn't want to put down her bear. The poor girl's mom and grandmother are now screaming at her and everyone can hear it. I handed my son a stuffed animal from the car and said, "There, now they match." I go out and sit. The little kids come out and do their walk. Then the previously hysterical grown-as woman who'd been screaming at a baby about a bear came out. To Unchained Melody. They faking sang it to each other as she came across the room. I had smoked out with my brothers and their wives beforehand, so it was everything we could do to keep our sheet together. That song has been ruined for all of us. They were married a couple of years and everything was her way. At one point, she demanded I spank my daughter for refusing to call her grandma. After a while, my dad started having injuries, falling from ladders and such. He'd never been to the more in his life than when he was married to her. Finally, she hit him with her car, backed up, looked him in the eye and said, "Bet that hurt," and drove away. My dad made my husband help him move out while she was away for the day. To be fair, my dad is incredibly narcissistic, selfish, a chronic liar and a serial cheater. It was honestly funny to watch him have to put up with someone worse than him. In the card, I wrote that I was glad they found each other. Thankfully not me, but my brother David, not his real name. The engagement lasted almost twice as long as the marriage. A little backstory. David met Amy, also not her real name, while in college. He was attending a well-known US law school. She was getting a sociology degree at a nearby college. We got along well with her. She was fun and funny, and they seemed perfect together. We grew up in a lower middle class home and enjoy the simple pleasures in life. Given the choice, we choose camping over a 5-star resort. We are happier eating a hot dog at a ball game than a rubby at Ruth's Chris. The funny thing is, Amy grew up only slightly better off, so none of us have any idea where Bridezilla Barbie came from. Literally from the moment they were engaged, she turned into an entitled "do you know who my fiancé is" little princess that only got worse each time we saw her. Fortunately this wasn't often, as he landed an amazing job at a well-known US corporation in a major US city in another time zone. He was paid well, which of course meant they couldn't have a pedestrian wedding anymore. It had to be over the top. Aside from the expense, the other dangerous thing about over the top weddings is the extra service and attention that brides enjoy. If you're a dressmaker, the bride ordering that $20,000 gown is going to get you a game. Ditto for caterer, florist, and all the rest. For the year-long engagement, Bridezilla Barbie was treated like a queen and grew used to it. Leading up to the wedding, each of our family, siblings, and mom, at one point or another talked to David and asked, "Are you really sure about this?" No conspiracy or anything. We were also just concerned about what he was getting himself into. The big day comes and goes. No real drama at the wedding, but it was the Amy show, with a cameo appearance by David. He didn't mind, but it was very clear to everyone that he was only an accessory. Once they got home from the honeymoon, she was shocked to discover she lived in a world that didn't exist to kiss her ass. That's when she turned from Bridezilla Barbie to Gold Digger Barbie. She refused to work, demanded a BMW, apparently to ease her commute to the job she did not have, more on that in a secretary, and ran up credit card debt. After about 6 months, he'd had enough. He hadn't even finished paying for the wedding before it was over. She pushed for alimony, but in the end, the final judgment was he would assume full credit card debt. They'd split marital assets. Each would keep their own car. Which brings us to the BMW. It was a lease. And in all the wrangling, she forgot it was in her name. So payments were on her. This was 20+ years ago. He remarried eventually, and they have 2 girls. He left the world of 90-hour work weeks, found a business partner, opened a small firm, and kept his stomach lining and conscience intact. I have no idea what happened to Amy. Good luck to bad rubbish. Dodged a Bridezilla. and as a single guy in the military at the time that was saying something point. I guess the first warning signs could have been how she said that she had done a project in high school where she planned out her wedding already. She mentioned it multiple times, I guess hinting that she was ready for marriage lol. Also she was kind of a spoiled brat and would argue with me over nothing, like to the point of tears. For example, we drove to Myrtle Beach and I was following GPS. At one point she said I missed my turn, so I looked at the GPS and I was still good, so I told her we are fine. She argued that her dad always went that way, but I told her this way was probably faster, so the GPS routed that way. She cried and argued the rest of the way. FML point. The real red flag was her reaction to her brother's wedding. Her future still had selected her best friend for the MOH, but my ex was still a bridesmaid, so it should been all good. But apparently she thought her extensive experience in planning weddings should have warranted her more input on the wedding and party prep. She kept crying that she wasn't allowed to give input on the wedding decisions and generally making hell for her brother. I tried to stay out of it. I was reading A Song of Ice and Fire at the time, so I was super busy, but one day it kinda blew up. I was sitting there on the couch reading with her and her parents there, and I'm guessing the bro asked the parents to smooth things over. They brought up the subject and said she needs to stop worrying about their wedding and it's not her place to fight to make decisions. The argument escalated until they were yelling and peaked with her demon face screaming at them. Like, red face full of tears, loud as humanly possible, howler monkey shrieking. I paused reading my book and kinda half looked up at her having her tantrum like what the fuck. Her parents were like, you have to go and act like this in front of your boyfriend. I think that was when I realized we would never get married, but I was lazy, so I didn't break up with her on the spot. I felt bad because we were about 26 over 27 at the time and her parents were probably hoping someone would marry her and she would move out, but I wasn't going to take that bullet. I was in her wedding and she was a coworker I barely knew. When she asked me, I said yes because I thought it was sad. She must not have many people to ask and is doing it out of desperation. This would be the last time I ever agree to do it for anyone. It was a year of hell. She called constantly. I think we had like 6 different dress dates all out of town. She took up every weekend for a year and cost all of us so much money. Hair, makeup, nails, shoes, dress fittings. She wanted the best of the best. Every outing included a lunch and tons of drinks that the bridesmaids were expected to pay because she's getting married. It was so many arguments, tears, her calling all of us at our work. In this time I had found a better job. I hated her by the end. I went to the wedding and watched her scream and cry all day. She had bought a dress a size smaller expecting to lose weight and not doing it, so we couldn't get the back zipped up. Someone came up with the idea to go out and buy a white fur shawl to wrap around her. It looked cute. Yup, she got married in an unzipped dress. She also spent hours telling the rest of us that we must have had them alter our dresses bigger so we could fit in them. It was wild, but we got that beach married. I was the first to leave. We watched her cut the cake and then left. I swore to never talk to her again, as did most of the wedding party. She called me 1.5 years later telling me the guy had left her. She was in a ton of debt from the wedding and then started complaining that the only reason I was friends with a girl from the wedding was because of her and how crappy we were for going to the beach and not inviting her. She also hinted that we kinda rode her for the wedding debt because we didn't stop her from overspending. You guys were supposed to be my friends and you knew I didn't have the money. Why would you do that? I hung up and blocked her number. Men who are reading this wondering if their future wives are going to be this way, get a wedding planner. Tell her or him exactly what you want in the wedding months and even years in advance, and then let her field all the questions, suggestions, and almost problems. It was the best $1,000 we spent because my wife could focus on getting married and not have to worry about when the flowers were showing up and how the food is being catered. The wedding planner allowed my wife to be able to redirect suggestions and questions and other frazzling things to her instead of trying to take all that on herself. I learned later she also helped my mother-in-law field my grandmother-in-law's boyfriend who took the day to be a dick in general. When it was time to proceed into the reception point, this is their job. It's not just to coordinate colors and where people are sitting. It's also to put out fires and ensure things are set up and happen on time. The most important thing you can do is to limit to the bride and groom who can order the wedding planner to do something. Only ever allow the parents to make suggestions. I don't care how much you love and trust them, it's not their day. The wedding planner will know and see a good idea when it's said, and will also know how to politely say it's not going to happen. Also, speaking from experience, your fiance should input on suit colors and budget and leave it at that. You should from that point on work with the wedding planner to make sure the suits arrive and that everything is in working order. This is going to sound weird, but you can buy really nice suits on Amazon and get them tailored to fit you. They will be nicer than the ones you rent from any box store. Speaking from experience on that one, because my dad outdressed me accidentally at my own wedding, I was genuinely impressed and wished I had listened to him when he suggested that 2 weeks before the wedding. Related to a Bridezilla. Lots of things. She and her husband were engaged 4 years with no mention of when they would get married. Didn't have much money. Then his sisters got engaged and mentioned they would be getting married the next year, and all of a sudden she wanted to get married that summer before them. Within 6 months they were having a backyard wedding. They set up a tent the day before and it poured out. They live on a wetland and the entire ground was sopping sink your feet in wet. The smell was also horrendous, and she just screamed at people to be quiet and that this is farm country. People, she does not live on a farm. She decided that the engagement ring she had wasn't good enough and forced her brother to give her grandmother's ring that was left to him specifically because someone in the family should wear it and all her other sisters were already married, so it should be hers. The caterers, when pulling up, realized they were supposed to set up on the far end of the tent. Again, the ground was terribly wet and asked if they could pull their car up to get their stuff out. I understand not wanting them to ruin your lawn, but she responded in front of her guests, "Are you faking crazy? No," and walked away. The caterers were 2 older women, and after that she didn't even offer to get anyone to help them unload their stuff across the terrible lawn. Her father ended up rushing over embarrassed and started helping them. The ground was so wet that they set up wood planks so their guests could walk across them when getting their food, but the caterers just had to stand in the muddy wet with nothing. The groom's mother was trying to set up the centerpieces so they were ready when people arrived, but it was extremely windy, as it always is in their yard, as it's almost like a field, and the centerpieces were extremely tall and kept falling over. The bride just kept screaming about how much of an idiot she is and how she ruins everything. She then proceeded to get extremely intoxicated and called a friend of hers who she had not invited to any wedding events because they had gotten into a fight, and told her, "If you don't get her, then obviously we aren't friends and you don't care about me." Then when said friend showed up, they locked themselves in a room and cried for almost an hour. She didn't tip the caterers at all, even though she herself works in the service industry. Then at the end of the night she got into a screaming argument with her in-laws and proceeded to tell her husband that she hated him and they shouldn't have gotten married, and she was going to rip up their marriage license in front of all her guests, who she then kicked out. They are still married, and we just recently found out she's been seeing another man all this time. But it's okay because they have an open marriage now and that's their lifestyle. I used to work with a guy who married a Bridezilla. She told him she did not want to marry him. He proposed. She said yes. Anyway, I don't have a lot of details about the planning stages, but what I do know comes from the best man, who is a friend of mine. When it came time for the groomsmen to go kilt shopping, they had to FaceTime the bride the whole day. She wanted them to wear a bright pink tartan, but they managed to talk her down. The groom found a tartan he liked, but the bride hated it and started screaming at him because she thought it was ugly and would ruin the wedding. They settled on a blue tartan. I hear there were screaming matches at bridesmaids' fittings, but have no details. For the stag party, the groom went out for a steak dinner and then on to a strip club. His uncle dropped him in it by tagging him on Facebook. When the bride saw it, she called him immediately and called off the wedding because he had betrayed her trust or whatever. So the wedding day arrives, and my husband and I were invited to the ceremony and the reception. We got an evening invitation, but on the back, it invited us to the ceremony as well, but my husband had to work in the morning, so we just went to the reception, which turned out to be a saving grace. The only other couple, who happened to be the groom's friends, who got the same invitation we did, went to the ceremony, but they weren't invited to the meal. So they went back to their hotel and had a McDonald's before coming back for the reception. During the ceremony, the bride looked furious the whole time. She didn't walk down the aisle so much as march at great speed and dragged her poor dad along with her. During the vows, the photos, everything, fuming. At the meal, the best man's girlfriend had been commiserating with the couple not invited to the meal, so was 2 minutes later in sitting down for dinner than everyone else, and the bride screamed at her for ruining the entire wedding. Not long after I arrived, I congratulated the groom, as the bride was deep in conversation, and I asked for a photo of them together. So groom taps bride on the shoulder to say that I wanted a photo, and she screamed at him and stormed off. He looked very embarrassed. The bride also told the DJ not to play any songs the groom or the groom's friends asked for, because she didn't like them. The wedding cost £20,000 and he took out a loan by himself to pay for it. She left him not even 6 months later. Here's a good one. My buddy in college started dating a girl who was renowned amongst the student population as batshit crazy. For instance, she had formally threatened to sue her sorority because they were not nice to her. All of his friends told him it was a mistake within months of the relationship beginning, but he did not listen. I don't know how she was on wedding day, wasn't invited, and she forced the wedding to be held in Amsterdam of all places, but I do have some stories of how she behaved generally when I knew her. Once hosted a party at our apartment where she had moved in without permission. She was chronically feeling poorly, and after the party died down, as I was leaving with some other folks, she told us she wanted to slit our throats because we were being loud in her house, and it gave her a headache. She did not pay rent, clean, or do any household chores. This comment was made at 3:00 PM on a Saturday. Groom's little sister went to our school too. Was in the same sorority as the bride. They all went to a formal event somewhere, and the night devolved into the bride accusing the groom in front of hundreds of people of sleeping with his little sister. This was pre-engagement. They were wed less than a year later. One day, I asked her casually, trying to make conversation, since she was occupying my house, her thoughts on what to get a girlfriend for a birthday. I mentioned that the girlfriend was into painting, and asked for a good store to buy supplies. Later, in front of my girlfriend, she purported to have handpicked the gift herself. They were married a few months before college ended. After college, the bride moved to Georgia for work, consulting, and insisted the groom come with her, even though he had dreams to attend medical school elsewhere. 1 year later, they were separated, and she had moved to the West Coast, Los Angeles, legally changed her first name, began dating a 40-year-old DJ, and was working on her modeling career. Bridezilla then, Bridezilla forever. My brother's best friend, Meek Jude, married a Bridezilla. She, dictator, is very specific about what she wants and gets very unpleasant the moment things don't go her way. She made the Meek Dude redo his proposal speech because the speech, and the way he was down on one knee, was not to her liking. Bridezilla also fired 4 bridesmaids leading up to the wedding. The eventual bridesmaid kept saying to everyone that she wished she was fired too. She also disallowed Meek Dude from asking my brother, his best friend, to be his best man at the wedding. The Bridezilla chosen best man even commented that my brother should have been the best man. My brother and I, and my ex-boyfriend, were invited because Bridezilla chose an extravagant 300 guest wedding package, but it turned out that they didn't have enough guests, so we were invited as bums on seats. Bridezilla got very unhappy with me when I asked that I would be attending without my ex, because how dare I mess up the seating arrangements by being single. Bridezilla chose Meek Dude's suit, and it was the most hideous thing ever custom made. A shiny satin baby blue / lilac / silver frilly suit with horribly uncomfortable pointy blingy shoes. It has been about 6 years and Dictator and Meek Dude are still married, namely because Meek Dude does everything Dictator says, and I mean everything. He ran a half marathon because she decided he should do it for her work event, but she's a lazy ass and wouldn't run 1 kilometer with him, including moving away to a country where she has friends and family, but he has no support system whatsoever. TLDR. Dictating Bridezilla and Meek husband still married after 6 years. Not the groom, but a bridesmaid 9 months after their wedding she confessed to me that she was cheating on him. The cheating continued as I tried to distance myself from her. She happened to be in my town, several hours from hers, on day, and we had dinner together. She decided to stay with me that night. Okay, by the way, she is a bit of a bully. That night we went and hung out with this guy I knew and was kind of seeing. At one point she disappears, so I go looking for her. I find her in a room by herself with no pants on. She's just had sex with one of the guys at the house. She'd known him for 45 minutes. Okay, so the next day comes, I figure she'd go home. She didn't. She kept staying at my apartment, and I let her, because I couldn't say no. Eventually her husband called, let her hear her son crying for mommy on the phone. She was unfazed. Then her mom called, and her sister, and holy crap, how did we get here? I don't remember how or when, but eventually she left. She and her husband divorced not long after. He remarried, and they are still married today. They moved into a small home on his aunt and uncle's land. Then she remarried her ex's uncle's nephew and booted her ex-husband from their home. The new husband was a closer relation and got first dibs on that house. Some things happened. She and her new husband divorced. She makes comments about him from time to time on social media and talks about how she's a giver and gives too much. Yeah, no, she's just a raging beach. Also, we don't talk anymore. Not me, but my brother's wife. My brother proposed twice and both times she said no. I kind of feel as though he only proposed because all his friends were married. He felt like he was being left behind, and to top all that, my dad had a bad habit of calling me and my brothers terrible things like lazy, weak, trifling, gay, pansy and all sorts of other things. This verbal and sometimes physical abuse led to both my brothers, including me, having problem. For my brother it made him feel inadequate. He also took a lot after our mother, who is complacent in my dad's behavior. So my brother meets this woman who is only 2 years older than me. My brother is 10 years older than me. So they begin dating and having sex behind the guise of being just friends. This was strike one. No one cared about their relationship but my mother, but his girlfriend insisted they don't tell anyone. So after a year my brother gets the idea in his head to marry her. Their relationship was a secret still at this point. He buys a ring and proposes. She says no. They continue seeing each other. A few months later he proposes again. She says the ring is too small. Then a bunch of months later he tries again, and she says yes. By now they finally admit they had been dating, and we say we already knew. So now comes the Bridezilla. Nothing was right for her. She changed the date of the wedding 3 times. Side story, she hated my girlfriend at this time because my girlfriend told the truth. She would tell them straight up that they were a toxic couple. So my brother's Bridezilla changed the wedding date to my girlfriend's birthday. That didn't pan out, so she calls it off. My brother pleads with her, and they get into a fight. She calls him a loser, weak, and says he's a poor excuse of a man, and that he should leave. A month or two later, after she was finished ghosting him and berating his manhood, they decide they are going to still get married. So the new date is now in October. It rains that day. She manages to convince my brother not to put me in his wedding, and she seats my girlfriend at the very back of the church. The ceremony was different. The pastor officiating the whole thing is a friend of the family. He gets to the part "speak now or forever hold your peace," and then he pauses for a long time. Then he sighs and says okay. Then comes the reception. We get there and find out my girlfriend, little brother and mother weren't invited at all. They tried to fix it by adding a few extra chairs to the event so we could sit, but my brother's now wife gets mad, saying it'll cost her too much. Then what anyone would expect, they go one horrible year together and then separate. They are still married now, but have been on and off separated for almost 10 years now. They had a kid in between that time. I feel sorry for him because you can tell the screaming, fighting and physical abuse he's seen has already damaged him at such a young age. 6. My advice. Be lonely. Be with yourself before you get with someone else. There's no rush. Loneliness only hurts. If you buy into the idea that you absolutely need someone to be whole, you're not alone. You are just you, and that's good. I'm married now, and me and my wife waited. We worked out some kinks before we got married. When the hard times came, we stuck by each other, not attacked each other. That's how I knew she and I were good for each other. We hit all the red flags head on, and we came out on top. A lot of young people need to stop glorifying relationships like they are such filled wonderlands of joy. They are work. They require sacrifice. That's what they really are. If people understood this, I think we'd have less Bridezilla stories like this. My dad married a Bridezilla after he divorced my mum. He had a chance to invest in a startup with a bunch of guys he worked with in the 90s. She insisted he spend that money on their wedding instead. If he had invested, that 20k would have made him like 60 million. I remember going to his friend's new house they bought 1 year after my dad's wedding. It was a literal mansion with tennis courts, swimming pools, jacuzzi, a games room that had crazy amount of arcade consoles, as well as a giant projection scene with every home console there plugged in, and about a dozen different pinball tables and a giant hedge maze. It was great. As a kid I had the time of my life running around trying to play on everything. I was 8 years old when that happened and never knew what that day was, and got the story out dad many years later. They were work friends who hit it big off their investment in their startup. He's still married to his new wife now. Bunch of spiteful, hate-filled women who must be able to suck a tennis ball through a hose pipe or something. Cause other than that I don't know why they still together. They argue constantly, and anytime she asks for money he says once he has 60 million in the bank he'll gladly give her whatever she wants. Till then she get up off her fat ass and can go out and earn it herself. So I was accused of being a Bridezilla, but I'll break down the story. Back in 2018 I got engaged on Christmas Day. My partner then had already been engaged before, but it was my first time. Stupidly excited. I had loads and loads of ideas. When I get excited about stuff I go crazy. Now my partner, part of the reason his first engagement fell apart was because his mum got too involved in the planning of the wedding. He asked her this time round not to. Like hell did she listen. So when I say I get excited, I was thinking about all the extras at a wedding, such as photo booths and bouncy castle. Yes, you heard. Now including these and everything else you budget. My wedding was looking to be £12,000. My partner was being tight with money and panicked so much. We aren't poor, but he's funny with money. Because of all the things I got excited about, none of this was booked. By the way, I was called a Bridezilla, when in fact, my future mill told me what color theme my wedding should be because her darling son bought his suit already, so I had to coordinate with him. She insisted on inviting her whole family, and I'm talking all her 7 siblings with their partners and kids and my partner's great aunt and second cousins. She told me I had to have my wedding local because her family had to be within taxi distance to allow for them to drink, which leaves me with one nice wedding venue. My partner wasn't happy with their organization, so we tried seeing where else, which the mill suggested I just get a social club/pub and get some basic catering in that one nice venue we originally had a date for. Hadn't booked it, but a date we suggested, and I didn't realize the second cousin was getting married on that date. So she started crying saying no one will wanna go to her wedding because they were at mine. Even though I booked nothing, just merely a suggestion. Eventually all the guests come to over 100 and my partner told me to cut back on guests, even though my family provisionally made 15 guests and couldn't guarantee they could all come because they all live abroad and basically have no money. Mill thought I shouldn't pay for a photographer to cut costs and thought my wedding photos should be done on a disposable camera, so you can imagine I was pretty pissed off. Like I was in tears because this dream day I was looking forward to was absolutely shat on by them both. Especially as my partner said, what's the point of a wedding, all it is in changing surname. So I was like, why you propose then? Only reason I wanted a fun wedding was because if I marry I plan on doing it once with someone I love and celebrating the fuck out to it. Obviously all of this showed up all the cracks in my relationship, and after 6 weeks of being engaged it was over. I'm not happily with someone who compliments me more. My old friend married a Bridezilla. Before the wedding was even planned, he was asking me if I think she would change after marriage. I told him that people are who they are, and a ring isn't going to change her. He disagreed and married her anyways. He started drinking more. He was already borderline alcoholic before marriage. She became more beachy and started acting like my wife and her were best friend. My wife couldn't stand her and only talked to her during couple dates. She put on Facebook that her bestie was pregnant when my wife was pregnant and put a picture up from my wife's Facebook. He started to cheat on her and she became more ridiculous with her behavior. They ended up divorced after about 2 years. She claimed us as her friends. She said they got divorced, but she got us in the divorce, even though we never hung out or talked. I don't think I even had her phone number. We stopped talking to her and him altogether until I attended another friend's wedding and she was there with a new guy. I got drunk and asked him why he was with her. He said some stuff like she pretty and nice. I said and a faking psycho and will drain you of all that is good. Something like that. I was drunk. Maybe just XXX. Later she was acting weird and I looked at him and said see, they broke that night. She blamed me. Oops. She essentially decided I was her slave and 100% of everything in the relationship was about her. It was never about me. She expected me to do every single thing around the house, cleaning and cooking, etc., while she did nothing. The sex was also just as her focused. She didn't care if I finished, and the sex was 100% about her coming. Once she had 2 orgasms, the sex was over regardless of what had happened with me. The one single time I got her to give me a blowjob, she touched the head of my dick with the tip of her tongue for less than a second and then said, "That's all you get." As a result of the sex experiences, I've been very focused ever since on making sure the girl gets what she needs as well, because I know how it feels to not get anything out of sex. Edit. Someone once said to me about my marriage, "So, you were essentially in the stereotypical misogynist asshole guy marriage, except the genders were reversed." And that's pretty accurate. The only time she ever cared about me finishing is when she decided we were having kids. Even then, she was always bugging me to hurry up. She actually said once, "Why can't you come in 15 seconds like a normal guy?" She never got pregnant. By the way, the marriage lasted about a year and a half, if anyone is curious. She kept everything in the divorce, except my car, and that's probably only because she hated my car. I also had zero interest in the house because I wanted to live 300 miles away near where I grew up, so I gave her the house without argument. I think I was the Bridezilla, Groomzilla, but I had multiple big life events happening at the same time. At the time, I hated the major I was in, but didn't realize it, so I was miserable every day. Me and wife to be in 5 days were moving apartments, but she had already left for our hometown to set up the wedding, so I was moving apartments by myself. I would drive to hometown, help with wedding stuff until afternoon, drive back to apartment or apartments, move until 3 AM with the 4 boxes I had scrounged up, drive 1.5 hours back to hometown, crash for a few hours and repeat. We had been chronically understaffed at work for the entire summer, so me and 2 roommates were working doubles 5 days a week and coming in whenever called. My truck was in and out of the shop all year and miraculously worked the second we took it to a different one. I was paying a ton of money for wedding/moving/gas driving back and forth, and I stress heavily about my finances, which all added up to me having more than one outburst in the kitchen I work in, being very rude to everyone helping with the wedding, and on more than one occasion making my fiancé I'm not sure if that works, cry. Moral of the story, don't move places of residence and get married on the same week. Communicate with your SO before lashing out, and make sure your planned major doesn't make you want to kill yourself. I did not know about the term Bridezilla until I read some of the interesting comments here and felt like one of my friend actually married to such mystical creature. So here's my take on the story. My friend was single for how many long years? I lost count tbh. He's good looking and has a very gentle soft personality, but he was also shy and awkward to girls. And one of his problem was he always wanted to date some supermodel or some girl that was way out of his league or any other people's league. I know it's better to take chances and make mistakes, but what I'm talking about here is almost equivalent of having a miracle, for instance dividing the Red Sea to cross the lake sort of miracle point anyways. After a bunch of him and Ted moments of him, one day he finally announced that he was going to get married. My friends and I were totally like, what the fuck, you never told me about this girl, and turns out he met her through his parents, and how she was his parents' friend's daughter, her family being a huge real estate folks, now rich, and all, and he was a bit excited of getting married, having the greatest sex in his life, and also the thought of possibly getting a portion of her parents' inheritance. The wedding was held in the girl's parents' privately owned hotel. Ironically, we did not get a room, since we weren't VIP enough, so me and my friends booked a hotel room for ourselves, and my friend who was getting married paid for our expenses with his own money. D-Day came, and as we were approaching the hotel we saw my friend and his soon-to-be bride in the limo. They just got back from the Mackie of a shop. As soon as we tried to approach to him, he immediately got out, greeted us. Then the inevitable red flags started to come out. That beach had the audacity to not even come out and say hi to us. Instead, when I waved inside the car to say hello, the beach frowned at me as if I was some kind of a faking freak hobo begging for money. Her expression showed it all, how she thought of us. The groom instantly saw what was happening and hurried us to the hotel. Long story short, the wedding was over. He got married. We went home with a bitter taste in our mouth. After 6 months of long absence, my friend finally called us and announced that he might get divorced soon. After the wedding they had a huge fight about who's going to take care of the baby that was in the bride's belly. She was pregnant before marriage, and after the wedding she drank a full bottle of whiskey and vodka and started to smoke. My friend, who was a health freak, tried to convince her to not smoke for him and most of all, their baby, but hell no, she was like fuck it and kept on living her life. The worst thing that happened was when she was actually using his money to fill her needs. My friend was earning 40k per year and that's Wine Beach was using 80-100k for her bags and stuff. She couldn't leave her fancy life and she literally told him that she did not know a person could only earn that much and called him a faking loser. And it's not like she was working or not. That swine was just sitting in the house doing nothing. 5 months after their marriage, they had a huge fight, and now she stopped cleaning or doing anything. She did not clean out the dog sheet that her dog made in the house, threw trash on the floor. It was a disgusting sight. My friend, who couldn't take it anymore, told her it might be best to leave each other and have a divorce. As soon as he said that, the beach took that recording to her parents, sobbed and cried for help. Korean laws are very weird that if a person says something out loud it could be used as an evidence. So since he mentioned divorce first, it was him who had to pay for her, even if she filed the documents for divorce. He lost his house and almost lost his custody of his son, but later on that beach, realized she could take a day or two off by letting her slave, she literally called him like that, to take care of the child while she hangs out with her club friends, so he barely got custody. My friend now is living in a corporate dorm and meets his son on weekends, etc. The last time me and my friends met him, he was in a deep depression. What really got me angry about this swine faking beach was when my friend showed her Instagram to us. She was playing the victim all along, talking about how her husband left her for another girl, did not care about the kid, not cleaning the house, etc. And her recent picture was her lying down on the sofa near the window of her nice new house that her rich daddy bought, with the words written "Justice prevails" on the bottom of the picture. So kids, wear your faking condoms before sex. Sadly, my sister was a bit of a Bridezilla during her vow renewal. She and her husband had a courthouse elopement, separated for several years, but never officially got divorced, then got back together. After the reconciliation, my sis decides she wants a dream real wedding she didn't get the first time. Her overall behavior wasn't horrifying, but she insisted on some rather ridiculous nuances. It had be in rural West Virginia, immediate family all live in Florida, most of the extended family in New York, and there were like 3 hotel choices in that area, all expensive. for the sake of his family, even though they were present the first time and we weren't. She couldn't resist throwing several digs at my brother for refusing to wear a kilt, when she should have been grateful he was in a good enough place, mentally and financially, to attend at all. I don't know what the hell she was thinking with her guest calculation, but there was way too much of everything for the number of people that ended up attending. Her cake was also obnoxiously huge and elaborate, considering there were about 30 people there. There was way more that was not great about the overall experience, but I feel those best highlight what it was like to deal with her on that particular occasion. That was 8 years ago, and they are still together, at least this time around. So, I've been reading a lot of the comments here. Basically everyone's relationship's not working out. I'm lucky it went the opposite way for me. The way our community is, that everyone has a big wedding, regardless of how much it will cost. Quite a few of my friends are still paying off wedding debt 3/4 years later. Anyway, she obviously wanted a massive wedding that was glitzier and more over the top than anyone else's. To set the stage a little, she's from a family that to the best of my knowledge used to have a bit of money but don't anymore. I'm very lucky to have grown up in a family that is very wealthy, but all low-key about it. No trust funds, or mansions or anything like that. Think more second-hand Japanese cars and a smallish suburban home. So, she wanted the massive wedding. I did too. Hello societal expectations, and it became a huge sticking point. Her family couldn't really contribute, which was fine, but it just got bigger and bigger. Designer dress, the best caterer, photographer, etc. It finally got to the point where we were talking about chartering a freaking plane to fly 200 people 2 hours away. Eventually the funder, aka my dad, put his foot down, and 10 days later she gave back the ring. Needless to say I was broken, as I thought she'd have outgrown this previous life she had, wouldn't get her license until her family bought her a BMW, only designer clothes etc. My job isn't some big fancy one that pays a crap ton of money, but can support us with a normal middle class lifestyle, but definitely not that sort. We obviously took a break to have some space, and to reassess. It's now 4 years later, and we are still together, happy and healthy. We didn't get married in the end, and it made a world of difference. TLDR. She wanted an insanely expensive wedding we couldn't afford. My family, who had the money, said no. She sulked for a few weeks, and got over it. We are happily unmarried, and together 4 years later. I have ex-in-laws. I have never wanted a big wedding. I don't like attention. I didn't want a wedding, period. I wanted to courthouse it. So my in-laws and I compromised, and had 2 weddings. / both destination and domestic. I had to plan around kids in high school, and then their parents decided that they weren't going to come anyway. So, because the kids weren't coming to the destination wedding, we had to have another one for them to attend. I was fine having a reception back home, but no, we needed to have a whole "another wedding," because it would be so sad to tell my future children that mom and dad got married at the courthouse. I tried to tell Mill that I wouldn't tell our children that. I'd say we went to Mexico and it was awesome. She was horrified. Wouldn't allow it. I and her precious son needed to have a whole wedding the weekend that we got back. She kept planning things and trying to invite her entire extended family to the second wedding. When I kept telling her that my family wouldn't be able to attend second event, she said that, well, not everyone gets to do everything. Although she was really working at getting everything covered for her side. Faking ridiculous. And that precious boy she was so worried about, I divorced him 6 months after. He went to an adult resort for work and rented a few companions. Not me but my uncle, when he married my aunt. Some of the details are a bit hazy, because this happened more than a decade ago. She was a huge Bridezilla in the time leading up to her wedding, by beaching at my aunt's, my mom, and even my grandma who had cancer. She got me and my brother to get tailored suits for the wedding, and gave us a sheet job which was giving out bubbles, and even yelled at me and my dad for asking how much longer it was going to be. I was really young at the time, so I don't really remember what she said. After the reception, and when we were at the dinner afterward, me and my brother were doing what young kids do, and that was dancing and talking to all the people that were there. And according to my dad, Bridezillas, my aunt and my now uncle got my mom to tell my dad that we had to leave, which that pissed everyone off at the wedding. I remember my uncle's mother saying to me and my brother, why is she getting rid of the entertainment? My dad took us back to my grandpa's house and then my grandma called us and she told us to come back. My dad told me that the only reason he went back was because my grandma's health wasn't the best and that'd most likely be the last time she'd see a daughter getting married. She didn't say a word to us the entire night and my aunt and uncle are still married and they have 3 kids together. I'm so glad I rarely have to see my mom's side of the family because they're all Karens in a way. The past 12 years she's been going out of her way to be the best aunt, but I still haven't forgiven her for all the shit she pulled and this is a reason I probably won't get married. I'm the sibling of a raging Bridezilla. Bridezillas don't transform from a normal human into a Bridezilla. I suppose that goes without saying for most here, but a normal woman doesn't turn into one because of a wedding. They're already entitled Karen types to begin with. My poor dad had that belief the bride's parents pay for the wedding, but he told me she didn't have to go all out like that. Of course she also had to have all the bells and whistles and didn't make it through the engagement and wedding planning / rehearsals period without some tantrums and drama, running to the restroom crying with a couple of her brainwashed friends running after her to comfort her makes me physically sick. What wedding day would be complete without a tantrum right before the wedding at the church? I can't recall what it was about because she's had so many tantrums over her life over other things as well. Demanded the bridal party all go to a hair salon to get their hair styled a certain way, how she wanted our hair. Later with pregnancies it was the same deal with baby showers. Same shitty self-entitled bullying behavior, but around the planning of baby showers. Her husband is a hopeless doormat. She's publicly put him down, yelled and shrieked at him, belittled him, and everyone always wonders why he takes it. Although someone said one day she'll push him too far. It's not surprising considering our mom really is responsible for creating a Frankenstein. The roots of it are in our mother has narcissistic personality disorder, which is too much to go into here. She basically encouraged her to be entitled and a bully in a kind of covert way. Her life was this wedding and all leading up to it. Planned for years before I met her. Her mom and her were going nuts with it where her dad offered to buy us a house instead. Nope, got to get married. Her dad paid for me to join a country club. Since we were going to have the wedding there I needed to join. I'm not sure how much that was, but I'm told by a friend who looked it up after it was $10,000 to join. And that didn't cover the fees for the year, but they weren't listed online, just the fee to join. I had little choices in the wedding stuff, but as long as there was booze I didn't care much. Point anyways, after the wedding, all downhill. Later 14 months. She used to stay in and decided to go bar hopping till 2 to 3 AM on weeknights a lot. She told me she wanted divorce 2 days before Christmas and then wanted to keep random sheet of mine to be spiteful. I found from her best friend after that she had been cheating. Also I used to think we were having money issues because I let her do the budget. Nope, I had plenty of income to support myself in my own after. She must have been blowing it. Point a pro was that my country club membership was put to use and her dad continued to pay it after until the time to re-up after the divorce. It also came with $75 a month in credit to buy sheet or get drinks, and it was use it or lose it, so I got free drinks with it most of the time. Not me but my uncle when he married my aunt. Some of the details are a bit hazy because this happened more than a decade ago. She was a huge Bridezilla in the time leading up to her wedding by beaching at my aunt's, my mom, and even my grandma who had cancer. She got me and my brother to get tailored suits for the wedding and gave us a sheet job which was giving out bubbles, and even yelled at me and my dad for asking how much longer it was going to be. I was really young at the time, so I don't really remember what she said. After the reception, and when we were at the dinner afterward, me and my brother were doing what young kids do, and that was dancing and talking to all the people that were there. And according to my dad, Bridezilla, my aunt and my now uncle got my mom to tell my dad that we had to leave, which that pissed everyone off at the wedding. I remember my uncle's mother saying to me and my brother, why is she getting rid of the entertainment? My dad took us back to my grandpa's house and then my grandma called us and she told us to come back. My dad told me that the only reason he went back was because my grandma's health wasn't the best and that'd most likely be the last time she'd see a daughter getting married. She didn't say a word to us the entire night and my aunt and uncle are still married and they have 3 kids together. I'm so glad I rarely have to see my mom's side of the family because they're all Karens in a way. The past 12 years she's been going out of her way to be the best aunt, but I still haven't forgiven her for all the shit she pulled and this is a reason I probably won't get married. Why Sip was a Bridezilla. Not a crazy one, but I think if she wasn't a single mom then it would have been worse. So starts with in-laws. My older Sills got married on a cruise and in-laws didn't go. We got married and planned and bought everything ourselves. Mel told us we had to pay for $25 a plate. Phil said hot dogs. They helped with nothing. I had both Sills as bridesmaids with my own sisters. I bought them dresses and keep everything low key. When my Sil got married she had 3 bridesmaids and didn't ask older Sil, half sister, or me. No big deal, except she picked people she only knew 3 months to 6 months before the wedding. She complains about how she wanted a small thing, but also yells and demands us all to do things for her wedding. Dumb stuff like, can you make table cards? Oh no, start over, this line is not cut right. Then she went and got her makeout done and didn't invite any of us. Then complained about how it was crooked. She had gotten the news to do a story about her wedding dress resizing. She bought it at David's in the wrong size, like 2 sizes too big, then got mad when she didn't get all the lace prices from the part taken off in big pieces. She makes her dad, Phil, who wasn't supposed to lift 25 pounds, come over and set up her wedding. All of this when older Sills and my family came from 16 hours away by car to visit for Christmas. She got married the 30th. So we literally got an hour of time for our child after being there for a week when everyone else left. In-laws watched the daughter of previous relationship the whole time so she could run around and do things like get sweatshirts for their honeymoon, then ask me to decorate them. I didn't mind, but it was only the beginning of the asks during the trip. If literally any part of our wedding was helped in any way by his family I would totally just said, that is who they are. But honestly in-laws were thinking it should be about them. I had gotten wrap top dresses and did my younger Sills twice. She redid it and flashed everyone when it was not tight enough. I was the groomzilla in this scenario. My wife nearly broke down when she went to one of those wedding event expo things. She was just supposed to look around for stuff she liked. I was already assigned offshore and she was moving there with me post-wedding. I did most of the planning and paid out of pocket mostly. People and suppliers said I was probably one of the easiest and nicest person they've worked with until they were doing things outside the contract. Some of the items used were clashing instead of the theme. All sorts of things. The worst was some of the pieces of my suit were tight. They even told me I got fat when I lost almost 20 pounds and nearly 2 inches off my waist compared to their records. Had to get some off the shelf replacements during the wedding. Every one of them was afraid of me. I ended up not having to pay for some things that were not in or breached contracts. After the wedding, I went aside and gave feedback to all the staff. I praised and tipped well those who did well and had a few of them in tears with thanks. I roasted the others after. Right now, she's hugging my chest and snoring lightly. Early morning and I'm about to get up. Friends call us the oddest and cutest couple, which is odd. Quite a few of the traditional gender roles we have swapped. We cuss all the time. I'm loud. She glares. etc. We've been married almost 8 years, and despite initial anxiety from being separated from her family when we moved away, she no longer wants to stay too near our immediate family. We've since moved back. Again, my work, but we live on the other side of the city. Social media is filled with our one-liners, her art, my plants, but mostly our cats. I can't say we are totally happy. Pandemic has made both of us anxious, and it leaks out sometimes, but we are happy together. A last comment: does anyone do anything just because? Or is everything an elaborate scheme for an end game point, like I drink coffee late at night if I feel like it, just because? Or I love a certain person, just because? I decide to learn to cook with one dish, just because point is everything an elaborate scheme for everyone else senseless competition with an end game. For all the women destroying my life, your hair is shiny too alright. Like first I take her housing, and her job, and overcharge her for everything then I send in my friend to rescue her then we exploit her personal intimacy then we use that and run the hoe campaign so whenever we are taking her money and she cries we call her a hoe. We can destroy her life then our children look better like they are perfect then we can get the stolen inheritance and we can keep exploiting her. If she gets too fat impregnate her with the wrong person and then we can get her for child abuse later. When she goes insane steal the baby get money off that then we can make money on the mental hospital and call her crazy then we can thrash her family for ransom money and make murder threats. I heard there are a few estates and we can roll them all this way even her friends have estates let's roll everyone. What the? Does anyone just enjoy life have awesome adventures and do anything just because you might find these elaborate schemes get you to a life you don't even like? Everyone chasing you to the death for money or shiny hair. etc. Point can everyone just relax most people with the schemes are rich as in you have food and shelter and physical health we could all be having awesome adventures and in a part is not elaborate war schemes. I forgive you, but please you won't be happy if you don't learn to do things just because when I went to jail because of someone's elaborate scheme to get bail money I decided to draw inmates. Just because when you threw me in mental hospitals I decided to observe and write about it. Just because. Very interesting when someone failed to heat my pool I'm swimming in below zero water in a diving suit. Just because. I went to grad school this past year, just because when you failed me out of it. Elaborate schemes. I found some other adventures in walking the city, miles, just because I know this situation used to be you exploited me and scored. I'm now in my 40s an older woman. It's confusing I know. Like we had her wrapped in an EMT vehicle and now we are in trouble. In the past we made money, it's over. Move to another party. Older women. No rap or elaborate schemes for exploitation. Point I'm always doing everything to either save a life or just because point the most valuable thing is a human life and you all are running around acting crazy for resources when everyone has food and shelter and physical health. I wrote this just because not the positive legacy I was trying to leave the grand cousins and grand siblings the cat lady.